Glad to know you're still with us. Afrexim Bank warns of higher inflation and rising interest rates across Africa in 2024 due to Red Sea attacks disrupting global trade. The report highlights uneven regional impact, with Egypt's Suez Canal traffic declining and South Africa's ports facing increased pressure due to rerouted vessels. Well, joining me to look at how this will impact Africa is Joachim MacEbong, a policy analyst. Thank you, Joachim, for joining me today. All right, Joachim, if you can hear me, maybe you need to unmute so you can, so I can hear you.
You can't hear me. Are you sure?
I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
Okay. All right.
So let's look at the figures, really. In the first 2 months of 2024, Suez Canal trade dropped by 50% from a year earlier, while we also saw trade through the Panama Canal falling by 32%, disrupting supply chains and, distorting key macroeconomic indicators. Help us paint a picture of the situation and how it's affecting global trade.
Yes, so with regard to the Suez Canal in particular, some of your viewers may recall that since the beginning of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in October, there have been attacks by a rebel group in Yemen called the Houthis. So these Houthis have been attacking ships that have been passing through the Red Sea. And I think that maybe having a little map up, may help viewers just situate where the Red Sea is and how that affects trade as far as Africa is concerned. Now, the Red Sea, on one end of the Red Sea, you have the Suez Canal that is run by Egypt, and on the other end, that is at the Yemen end, you have the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Now, both of these points are what they call choke points in global trade. So what that means is that if there is any disruption there, at any of those choke points, it will be difficult for ships to pass through there with ease. And since the Houthi attacks have been on the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, on the other end, of the Red Sea, ships have now refused to pass. To go through the Suez Canal, because when you go to the Suez Canal, you then have to exit. At the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and now that is what is leading to the reduction of 50% in traffic that you see through the Suez Canal. Now, the immediate impact of that is borne first of all by Egypt, because the Suez Canal contributes plenty of money to the coffers of Egypt, and because of that, you have their own finances heavily affected, and also all the countries in Africa that share a border with the Red Sea. So you're looking at, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Sudan. You have those shipments that they rely on for the imports of their staple foods and other things. Those shipments have now been seriously disrupted and are also affecting their economies as a result. Yes, so thank you for that. So you have the Suez Canal up there on the top left. And then on the other end, you have, you see Yemen there, and you see the border countries there, the African border countries that border the Red Sea. You have Egypt, Sudan, you have Eritrea, you have Djibouti, you have Somalia, and you have Ethiopia as well. So these are the countries that are immediate impact zone as it were of these trade disruptions. But the Red Sea and the Suez Canal is also important, not only because it accounts for about 15% of global trade, but it is also, and most importantly, it is a shortcut between Asia and Europe. And because it is a shortcut, it means that shipments can get around the world much faster, than they would if you. But in this case now, since there's a disruption in that area, okay, they then have to go all the way around, the African continent, down to the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. And then
okay, just before you continue, Joachim, I know you're already on, talking about Africa and all of that. Specifically, I would like you to probably talk about the macroeconomic implications of this for Africa.
Yes, definitely. So when you have those shipments, and those shipping costs going up, because when you have to go around the African continent, it is going to add at least 10 days to the trip, and it is also going to add several $1,000s or several tens of thousands of dollars regarding just the cost of those shipments. So you have all of those costs that are going to be passed down to African consumers. And because of those costs being passed down or those shipments being disrupted completely, you then have those scarcities and you have those higher costs that will then definitely increase inflation on the continent. Now, again, we are only just trying to recover from the disruptions due to the Russia-Ukraine war. Your viewers will recall that there was a Black Sea grain deal, that was supposed to benefit African countries, allowing grain to exit Ukraine, and come toward and come to Africa. Now, but the problem here is that on top of that, now we are now adding this particular disruption there, and it's only going to worsen, the inflationary pressures that we have been dealing with now for nearly 2 years.
I like how you started talking about inflation. Now, Afrexim Bank released a report recently where it said that African countries are poised to experience heightened inflation levels and even sustained interest rate tightening throughout 2024 because of this. I mean, I'm tempted to start talking about the Nigerian story. But before we get to Nigeria, this does not sound good, or does it?
No, it doesn't. And from a geopolitical perspective, that is directly tied to economic outcomes. I wonder if there is a way that African countries through the AU can organize themselves and demand for a permanent ceasefire, in Gaza that will allow those shipments to continue, through the Red Sea.
Joachim,
so the issue is that
you made it sound so easy. We've got UN, you've got a lot of persons, powerhouses calling for the same thing, and nobody has budged. So what makes you think Africa is going to make a difference here?
Well, the African continent and African leaders have been getting increasingly involved in global conversations. They have gotten increasingly involved in conversations around climate change. They've gotten involved in conversations around ending the Ukraine war, as we have just talked about, and they're getting increasingly involved in other conversations as well. And this particular conflict that has a direct, impact on African countries, and Africans, is something that they definitely have to also add their voice to as well. It is not easy to know what particular levers they have to pull, or leverage that they have to pull, there. But it is something that they should definitely look at trying to exercise, because the longer this goes on, the higher the inflationary impact will be, and the greater the impact will be, on the various governments on the continent.
All right, I'd like you to talk about, the implication of heightened inflation for African countries, and which of these countries are likely to be more impacted by this?
Yeah, so straight away, the immediate countries that are likely to be most impacted are the ones that are, that border the Red Sea from the map that you just displayed earlier. So you have Ethiopia there, you have Somalia, you have Eritrea, you have Sudan, you have Egypt as well. And those countries are the ones that are going to be most impacted because their shipments come directly through the Red Sea. The other countries on the continent, will be impacted, but maybe not to the same degree. What they're likely to have is just the impact of greater shipping costs, and just longer wait times, with regard to the shipments coming through there. But they will also have their own impacts to deal with, and they may also need to source supply for some of these critical goods from other places from other places in the world, depending on just the specifics of the supply chain that they're trying to deal with them.
In some countries, analysts are actually beginning to forecast when we should start saying, cooling inflation, cooling off, and, by implication, less hawkish interest rates. Nigeria, for example, targets 1.7% inflation, Now, putting this situation in perspective, should we write off 2024 as the year inflation will probably remain sticky in Africa, in Africa, let's put it that way?
Well, so I think, Perpetua, I think the first thing to note is that various African countries have various inflation stories. So in Nigeria specifically, Nigeria's own inflation story is largely self-inflicted, first and foremost, compared to other African countries that have managed their own inflation story much better over time. So what constitutes high inflation in Nigeria, may not be seen. May not be seen as, may not be tolerated elsewhere on the continent. So I think that's the first thing to think about. What African countries need to do, if you ask me, is to is to deal with the internal causes of inflation. So, rampant and out of control government spending, for example, and just the printing of money there. And then if they can get that under control, then they are then left with the exogenous effects, like again, that have to deal with issues of conflict from around the world. And then maybe they can mitigate that by trying to increase supply by getting supply from other countries in the meantime. But I think that the country like Nigeria specifically has a lot of internal issues that it has to deal with first of all before it can seek to gain control over its wider environment. But a lot of our issues in Nigeria specifically are self-inflicted, but you cannot really say the same for many other African countries.
Maybe you should just talk about these other African countries, maybe about two of them.
Yeah, so in a place like Egypt, for example, I think that Egypt and the government spending in Egypt, especially, has really contributed to inflation, over time, and that is also part of what they are dealing with, when they are talking about just the difficulty they have with trying to arrange, just a more stable macroeconomic environment. Some other countries have, maybe more reliant on their own domestic production to take care of their domestic needs. And if they have issues of bad weather and a low harvest, then that is going to also impact their own inflation story as well. So I think a place like Egypt also has its own internal issues, just like Nigeria. But then when they can deal with that, and they're currently in an IMF program now, I believe, when they can deal with that, then the level of inflation will drop off enough so that they can then begin to engage with the other issues like calling for a ceasefire, and insisting on a ceasefire elsewhere, so that trade can resume normally.
All right, well, we understand the sad reality. The Red Sea issue portends, especially for Egypt. We also see South Africa facing increased traffic and pressure in its ports, due to the rerouting of vessels through the Cape of Good Hope. Shouldn't this, be good for South Africa and surrounding countries?
Absolutely. So it should be good for South Africa because the Cape of Good Hope there can provide things like refueling, refueling and various other services to ships that are passing through there. However, the issues around South Africa's infrastructure and its road infrastructure, its rail infrastructure, its ports infrastructure, its electricity infrastructure, will make that I've come together to make sure that this particular thing that should be a boom for them, is only just adding strain. So I think that their performance on their infrastructure over the last several years, may be giving them a problem, when it comes to fully maximizing, the benefits of the increased traffic through their ports. In past years, this might not have been such an issue, but now with the various pressures, that they have infrastructurally, then it's becoming a problem.
All right, thank you so much, Joachim MacEbong, for your thoughts. I would have thought that, a situation like this should actually offer opportunities. But sadly, just like Nigeria, when opportunities present themselves, we always are not ready. I hope Africa will be ready some of the time.
I hope so too. Thank you for having me.
All right. That's it. All right. That's it on this edition of Business Edge. You can follow us on social media. We are at New Century TV. You can also go to our website, www.newcentury.africa. You can download our mobile app on Play Store and on App Store. Till next time, I am Perpetua Fasanmi-Peter. Bye for now.